Welcome into another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. It is a Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show edition. I'm your host, Benjamin Wolk, as always, with Jordan D. Hill. He's in Destin, Florida for this one. I'd love to say he's enjoying the beach or something like that, but he's hard at work down there in Destin. A great show for you, although guestless, plenty to talk about. Some news on the recruiting front in terms of Georgia adding a big commitment on the offensive side of the ball. So we'll get into that to start. We're going to preview a massive official visit weekend. That's both in volume of prospects that's going to be in town, as well as the magnitude of some of those recruitments that's going on. So we're going to actually tier those OVs to help you all understand how to kind of view them through different lenses as we go into this weekend. And then, of course, we'll do some arrow pointing up and predict a commit. Jordan, we're going to start with Ryan Mosley's commitment, but before I do that, you've been down in Destin. Anything? I know you just talked with Josh Brooks too. Anything interesting that we should lead off the show with talking about on that front?
Not really. It's kind of been run of the mill, nothing crazy. The talk, we're recording this on Wednesday, the SEC talking about potentially making a partnership deal as far as scheduling with the Big Ten, which I think makes sense when you consider where those two conferences are at this point and sort of them leading the charge when it comes to playoff format and stuff like that. So we'll plug a story I wrote on Wednesday looking at some of the Big Ten programs that I think would make a good opponent, would fit well with Georgia. And I'll throw it to you. Any Big Ten team you think would make for a fun home and home, maybe a couple games against Georgia?
Well, we were sort of stealing the thunder of arrow pointing up a little bit because I was going to talk about this during that. But actually, let's table this talk for that because I've got some ideas. And I think I love the Big Ten SEC challenge potential of what could be done there and how it could rotate on an annual basis. And, not dissimilar to what they do with basketball, but we'll talk about that a little bit more too.
I will say we had a chance to talk to Josh Brooks, and I asked him if they'd explored sponsorships, on-field sponsors in like Sanford Stadium. And he talked about that being something they've discussed. Also, Foley Field, Stegman Coliseum. He set up the media members and said, hey, if any of y'all's organizations want to chip in, how much do you think it would take us to maybe get a Stay Wolk end zone? How much do you think Sanford would take for Sanford to part with that?
Tell Josh Brooks people to call my people. We'll see how much self-branding I want to do here. That's interesting though to know. I mean, I know that's sort of the world that we're living in, but it is interesting to know that stadium rights deals for Sanford, Stegman, Foley, like very realistic in the near future potentially. All right, the news of the week. Let's get into that first, and that is Ryan Mosley, wide receiver from Carrollton, Georgia, committing to Georgia. A little bit of news to kick off this window where there is going to be a lot of recruiting news. I think it's reminiscent of Zayden Walker's recruitment a year ago where, he's a guy that really sounded like he was trending Georgia all spring long, had a full official visit slate scheduled, was scheduled to go to Georgia with his first official visit. And after visiting Georgia for that first time, didn't really feel the need to take any of those other visits. Zayden Walker's happened that May 30th weekend last year. Ryan Mosley's happened a little bit sooner than that. He took his official visit for that May 16th, May 18th weekend. And we talked after that visit and leading into that visit, frankly, that Georgia was the team to beat for Ryan Mosley and that he should have been viewed as such. And I think this is just going to set off what should be a good news summer for Georgia. Just the nature of the recruiting calendar as it is. This is the first of many commitments to come for Georgia over the next several weeks. Just some details about Ryan Mosley. I know I've seen him listed a few different places, but this is the most recent Georgia measurement that I've heard. So this is the one that I'm going to go with. It's 6'2", 211 pounds. As a junior, he had 55 catches, 848 yards, led Carrollton state runner-up with 12 touchdowns, averaging about 15.5 yards per catch. I know in that state championship game, he had 79 yards and a touchdown. I mean, this is really your prototypical wide receiver. Like, this is when you talk about bigger frame and build, he can run all the routes that you ask him to run. He's a natural pass catcher away from his body. He really excels in that contested catch situation. Like, multiple practices that I've been to of Ryan Mosley's through the years, he has made catches that have been great for video clips. I mean, he is the type of guy that will be draped by defenders and finds a way to come down with catches. I think that's to be expected when you're 6'2". I know he's listed at 6'4" in some places, but when you're 6'2", 211 pounds, you're kind of expected to be good in those contested catch situations, and he certainly lives up to that. I think where he surprises people is with his fluidity after the catch when he has the ball in his hands. I mentioned that state championship game against Grayson where he had 79 yards, he had a touchdown. That touchdown was, they got the ball to Ryan quick in the quick passing game, made a guy miss, kind of just left the secondary in the dust. And he has the ability to do that more than maybe people would expect when you just see his size, his length, his frame, his contested ball catching stuff. He's really good at that as well. And I think that that's why James Coley really zeroed in on Ryan Mosley as one of the top in-state wide receivers in the 2026 recruiting class. I mean, this was, a guy that Georgia prioritized really I would say dating back to last October is when Georgia identified Ryan Mosley as someone that it wanted to pursue as a top wide receiver target in-state in this class. Him and James Coley have developed a really strong relationship throughout this entire recruiting process. And, that's just kind of what you get when you bring James Coley in as your wide receivers coach. I will note, and I don't know how much we should talk about this yet, just based on some of the conversations that I've had, but Ryan Mosley was in some senses recruited as a two-way athlete. This was a guy that at his junior day at the beginning of the year, he sat in on the offensive meeting rooms and he sat in on the defensive meeting rooms. When he's talked about position fit at Georgia, he's done film breakdown sessions with James Coley. He's also done it with Travaris Robinson. I mean, you saw, if you looked at some of his official visit photos that he put out, there were a couple where it was him with both James Coley and Travaris Robinson. And, I've seen Ryan Mosley play both sides at the high school level. He absolutely has the ability to play wide receiver or play safety. That said, I view him as a wide receiver. He's approaching this process as committing to Georgia as a wide receiver. Is there a world 2-3 years down the line where that materializes into something more? I'm not ruling that out. Like, they've left the door open for that, and they have entertained the possibility of him playing on the defensive side, and they've evidenced that through some of the actions that they've taken on his recruiting visits to make him feel at home on the defensive side as well. But I think of him as a wide receiver commitment, not a defensive back commitment, but just something to store away for later and think about in the future. I will say this is me editorializing a little bit here, but he is a 3-star in the 24/7 Sports recruiting rankings. I don't think that that's something that will stay this way. I mean, I think that this is for many reasons, a tried and true 4-star. And I think that when it's all said and done and we expand, we update our future rankings and we expand the number of 4-stars that there are, this is one that I feel, just when you think about size, athleticism, he checks all of those boxes. I'll say this too. I was talking with someone that is in an administration role at Carrollton earlier today, and he said to me, I spend time with this guy every single day, and I couldn't think of a single negative word to say about him if I tried. And I think this isn't a guy that's on the football coaching staff. This isn't someone that should necessarily feel obligated to say that about him if he is a little bit, of a knucklehead outside of football. That's not the case, because he went out of his way to make that clear to me after I had posted my articles about Ryan Mosley. And so I think this is a big-time pickup. I think it's really important that Georgia was able to get him in now, and I think that really it was only a matter of time. Jordan, I know that you've had a chance to check out his film and, see some of the coverage that we've had about him as well. Just what are your thoughts on this poll for Georgia?
I really like this one. I think you deserve credit for pointing to Ryan Mosley as a big time priority for Georgia and getting him. I think you said 6'2", a guy with a lot of talent and a guy that, I look at a school like Carrollton and the success they have had the last few years. I don't think you can go wrong going after a guy like that. And to me, great to kind of hear the background about him that he's thought that highly of at Carrollton. And then it's kind of just like a bonus that, potentially he can give you some snaps on defense if they decide that's something they want to do. I think this is a very nice, very valuable first piece when it comes to wide receiver, because it seems like, Georgia could go a whole lot of different ways with the wide receiver position in this cycle. So I think it was worthwhile to get Ryan Mosley now, get him committed. You feel good about that commitment. And I'm with you, Ben, just based on what I know about Ryan and what I've seen. I think he will be a 4-star. I'm sure that there were plenty of fans who felt a little underwhelmed because it's a 3-star. I think this guy is a 4-star talent. And I think by the time he gets to Georgia, you will see that.
No doubt about it. It should be said, it has to be said, predict a commit win for Team Wolk as well. But Ryan Mosley, just sort of the nuts and bolts on the recruitment itself. He committed to Georgia over Alabama, Texas A&M, Nebraska, and South Carolina. When it got down to it, I think Alabama and South Carolina were the two that we probably were most conscientious of when we were talking about if Georgia wasn't going to get him, who would. Those were the two that we'd been mentioning. That said, he's not going to take official visits to any of those 4 places. That had been planned. He was going to officially visit all of those throughout June. That's not going to be the case. And just a little bit of, and I wrote about this at Dogs 24/7 earlier in the week as well, but a little backstory on this and why you might have seen our reporting be pretty confident in him going to Georgia eventually. This is a guy that silently committed to Georgia in April. He let coaches know back then. It was only over the last week or so that he started to let all of the other coaching staffs that had been recruiting him know. But he took that OV May 16th to May 18th. And I think really going into that weekend, he knew, but coming out of that weekend, I think he certainly knew that he was going to be shutting things down. He was going to be at Bama this upcoming weekend for an OV. That's not happening. He's going to actually come to Georgia for that official visit weekend. And I think you can expect to see Ryan Mosley at Georgia as an unofficial visitor this weekend. Also very likely that you see him again June 13th weekend as well as an unofficial visitor. He said that he's going to come up and try and help Georgia recruit Sedarian Morgan, who I think of as one of the top wide receivers on Georgia's board. So he's going to be active with guys like Craig Dandridge and Vance Spafford, were people that he name dropped that he communicates with on a pretty regular basis. And I think he's going to be an active recruiter. And, he's got a high school teammate, Zakai Helton, center from Carrollton, that will also be on an official visit this weekend too. So I think you can expect him to be active there. But like I said, Jordan, this is why you hire James Coley as your receivers coach right here.
Yeah, I like the addition quite a bit. And, as much flack as Coley got for the wide receiver room in 2024, they signed an outstanding group of receivers in 25. And picking up Ryan Mosley and, on top of what they've got in Brady and Vance Spafford, they've got the building blocks there for an excellent receiver core in what they signed in 2026.
I said this on Dogs 24/7. I think it was either in the Q&A or when we were talking about Ryan Mosley's commitment. But the reason why James Coley, and I think that there are other position coaches at Georgia that do an exemplary job of this as well. But, you get the question a lot, how many wide receivers is Georgia going to take? Is it going to be 3? Is it going to be 4? Is it going to be 5? And, I think that number is a little bit fluid right now. I would say 4 or 5 is probably likely, which might surprise some folks given the big haul that it just took last cycle. But, you look at Georgia's receiver board, like you mentioned, there's 2 wide receivers committed, or prior to Ryan Mosley, there were already 2 wide receivers committed. Now there's a third with Ryan Mosley. You've got some wide receivers that we'll talk about that I think Georgia feels good about that are coming on campus here this week. I think at the end of June, there's some wide receiver official visitors that Georgia is feeling really, really strongly about as well. And so Georgia now finds itself in a choices spot when it comes to wide receiver. They kind of get to decide, all right, who makes the most sense for Georgia? sometimes you got to have hard conversations and, tell people no or turn people away or maybe encourage people to look elsewhere. Like that's just the nature of big time recruiting. And I think that's happening at the receiver position. And James Coley is the reason for that right now. Let's pivot to talking about official visits. If it hadn't been for Ryan Mosley, we would have started here because this is a big time recruiting weekend for Georgia. At the time that we're doing this show, there are 18 official visitors scheduled, which is crazy. I mean, Kip Adams and I, we do the weekly sort of breaking down where things stand. And typically, there's 9, there's 10, there's examples, maybe 12. I think we've gotten to 14, 15 range for some over the last couple of years, but 18, I'm pretty certain this is the biggest June official visit weekend in numbers yet. And I think that, in terms of storylines and the importance of some of these visits, you can really say the same. What I will say is there's always the chance, because this show is happening in the middle of the week, there's always the chance that there are some names that pop up as we get closer to Friday and Saturday. Stay locked into Dogs 24/7. I think we've done a great job of being ahead of the curve this week when it's come to who's visiting, who's not visiting. So stay locked in there. But what I wanted to do in terms of how we break down the official visits, because there are 18, and I want to mention everyone, but I don't think that we can get into the details of every single recruitment, and it probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense to. I kind of wanted to tier each of the, have different categories or tiers for the various 18 so that you can kind of contextualize who's in what category and how should I be viewing each of these players going into these weekends, because not everyone's in the same situation. Some guys are coming into this weekend knowing that they're going to be committing to Georgia. Some guys, let's just use the last visit weekend as an example, May 16th to May 18th. There were people like Ryan Mosley who were coming into the weekend knowing I'm going to be a Georgia Bulldog. I've already let them know that. It's only a matter of time. It's just how does it end up playing out? Then there are other players where they're not as likely to be ending up at Georgia for one reason or another. Their choice, Georgia's choice, position fit, numbers game, whatever that looks like. And then there's players like Shadarius Tootle where they're committed to another program coming into the weekend. It's kind of hard to say definitively they're favoring Georgia or not favoring Georgia when they're committed elsewhere before they've come on that official visit. And so I think there's a lot of similarities between that weekend and this one. So the first category that we're going with, Jordan, are the people that I'm calling the dogs. The people that I think, as we sit here right now, Georgia should be feeling pretty good about where they're positioned for them coming into the weekend. And I would be surprised when we're debriefing next week if we're having many different conversations. The only different conversations I could envision is if they just had a hankering to lock down their recruitment. And if that's the case, we might be talking about them at the start of an episode when it comes to committing. So obviously we've got Jordan Smith. He's the safety from Houston County, already committed to Georgia. Don't need to elaborate much further there. I even thought there was a possibility he would change his official visit weekend because so many of the commits are coming that June 13th weekend, and his high school teammate Kayvon Conciaro is the last weekend of June. I thought there was a chance he might move to that, but much like Ryan Mosley, I think you'll probably see Jordan Smith pop up at multiple official visit weekends, even if it's as an unofficial visitor. Carter Lucky, defensive lineman from Norcross, younger brother of Lawson Lucky. I think it's only a matter of time with that one. He's got official visits scheduled to Ohio State and Florida State, but it's hard to come up with a world where Carter Lucky is not in Georgia's class. Craig Dandridge is a wide receiver from Cambridge High School that recently adjusted his official visit schedule. He was supposed to be going to Clemson this weekend. Clemson's full. They've taken all 3 wide receivers that they're going to take. I think that says a lot about how Clemson probably feels about their wide receiver class, that they are kind of saying thanks but no thanks to a few really talented wide receivers. But their number was 3 at wide receiver, and there was a chance that it was going to be 4 for a couple of guys that are actually going to be at Georgia this weekend, Craig Dandridge being one of them. But I feel as good as ever about where Georgia sits with Craig Dandridge, and the fact that when he no longer was visiting Clemson, he ended up putting Georgia at this important early weekend for him, I think says a lot. And then Kamari Brooks, he's an edge rusher from outside linebacker, jack linebacker, however you want to characterize it, from North Oconee High School. If you're listening to this on Thursday or watching it on Thursday, depending on what time, there's an article at Dogs 24/7 that you can check out more in depth with Kamari Brooks. But he's another one that's still a Georgia-Alabama battle, but I really like where Georgia sits with it. Jordan, is there anyone that surprised you to see on this list, or that maybe you thought would be on this list that we'll have in a different category?
Well, I'll just start here. Ben, do you think that Georgia was intentional in just going through the Team Jordan of the predicted commits? Because if I'm not mistaken, did I have each of those guys?
Yeah, now that I think about it, I guess I didn't realize that all 4 of those are your predicted commit squad, huh?
I will say I'm very interested to hear what we hear from Kamari Brooks after this, just because to me, sort of reading the tea leaves, I kind of feel like of those guys that you mentioned, his recruitment at this point may be the most competitive. It sort of seems like Alabama and Georgia are really pushing for it. Being more of a local guy, maybe that helps Georgia. But his is the one that I want to sort of hear what he has to say afterwards, what he says about, Chidera Uzodiribe, what his feel was of this visit, because, I think on the whole, Georgia should feel pretty good about that group you just named. But if you told me, all right, one of these guys gets away, Kamari Brooks would be the guy that I would say out of that group. So this is a very big visit weekend.
No, I think that's fair. And, where I think Georgia's done a great job there is Georgia's only taken, very likely, I shouldn't say is only, but very likely only taking one at that spot. One based on who they took last cycle and in the portal. Also, when you look ahead to the 2027 class and what's possible for Georgia at that position in state, I think it's going to be minimal in numbers, and I think that Georgia has identified Kamari Brooks as the guy that it wants to bring in at that spot in that class. And I think that in talking with Kamari Brooks earlier this week about it, he feels that very much. Not to say that he doesn't feel love or prioritization at Bama, and that's why Bama is very much still in this thing, thanks to former Georgia linebacker Christian Robinson really keeping him in it. But this is one that Georgia, I think, really wants, and I think that Georgia has made clear he is their guy at that spot in this cycle. All right, the next category that we're going with, I call it the sitting pretty category, but it's also kind of the let's see what we hear category coming out of the weekend, because it's guys that I think, if Georgia pushes for and says like, hey, and this is like difficult conversation, I guess, but anybody that lives in the recruiting world gets it. Like, there is a difference between recruiting someone and pushing for a commitment from someone. Like, you can recruit someone, you can say, hey, I want you to come on these visits. We want you to come, bring your family. We want to come out and see you, all of these things. But you might not be sitting here saying like, hey, things are starting to get real. We got to have a real conversation, but we want you to commit. Like, that's sort of what happened with Georgia and Ryan Mosley probably, is Georgia said, hey, you can keep taking these visits. You can go do all these things, but you've been silent. Like, can we just lock this thing down and call it quits on the recruiting? And you can really get a sense as if you're Georgia or any other program that's recruiting a guy, you can really get a sense about how firmly you should feel about that silent commitment or how that recruitment in general, if they're willing to just say, all right, yeah, let's close this thing down. And so these are guys that I feel like if Georgia were to really push for, I'm not saying they'll get a commitment this weekend or a public commitment this weekend, but I think that Georgia should be feeling pretty good about by the end of June where they'd be sitting with these guys. And so there's 5 of them, 4 of them in state, 1 of them out of state. So I'm just going to run through those 5 real quick. Center from Carrollton, Georgia, Zakai Helton. Defensive lineman from Lithonia, Georgia, Tico Crittenden. Defensive back from Duluth, Georgia, Peyton Dyer. Tight end from Bowden, Georgia, Caden Prothro. And offensive lineman from Timberland, South Carolina, Desmond Green. I believe that's also another very Jordan Hill heavy predicted commit team. But all 5 of those guys, I don't need to get into the details of every single one of their recruitments, but all 5 of those guys are players that I think have been hanging around. And, I'll say this, Caden Prothro probably could have been in 3 different categories. I probably would have felt good about him being in the dogs category. I would have felt good about him being in this category. And I would have also felt good about him being in what I have as another category is like the competitive recruitment category. He could have really been in any of these three and qualified. The reason I have him here is because I think it sort of bridges the gap between the dogs category and the competitive category. And that's just sort of where he falls for right now. But all five of these guys, I have had conversations about putting them in mock classes in the past. In Desmond Green's case, in Peyton Dyer's case, in Caden Prothrow's case, they've been in mock classes in the past. Zakai Helton is one where I think I've danced around it at times, but the reality is he's been 250 pounds at certain points during his recruitment, and you're not going to commit to Georgia as an offensive lineman at 250 pounds. Just the reality of it. Well, he's told me this. I have gotten this confirmed outside of Georgia measurements, I should say, but from a school that I trust and that he has been to in this spring. He measured in at 291 pounds. And so I think that this changes the way that I view Zakai Helton as an offensive line target for Georgia. And I think that he's known that. I think that he understood, like, I've got to add on this weight. Like, I have to, and this isn't just a Georgia thing. You know, you look at all the schools recruiting him, they all were calling upon him to try and increase weight. And he's dealt with various things that has contributed to that through the years. But this is a guy that I think if he holds that 290 to 300, when you watch the film and the skill set that he has, real possibility for him being the center of the class. And we've talked about a couple of other guys that could be interior line options that might, be centers. They might be guards, whatever. This is a guy that I think would be a center option for Georgia in this class. And so very interested to see one, does that 290 plus hold true when he weighs in on his official visit this weekend? And if so, does Georgia crank up the heat for him and say, hey, we want you to be that guy in this class? Because if so, that's something that I think could really turn in Georgia's favor. And then Tico Crittenden's a guy that I have never had in a mock class before, but I have definitely had conversations. He might have been in mock class 1.0. This goes to show my own recall on my own mock classes isn't that great. But any of these five guys I could see in Georgia's class when it's all said and done. That could be commitments that happen on the spot over the weekend. That could be decisions that end up happening in July. But all five of these guys I'm considering very similarly in terms of if Georgia turns it up, I think there's a good chance that they wind up as Bulldogs. This is a big one, I guess, just for making and breaking both of our predicted commit teams too, Jordan.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated to see what happens with Caden Prothrow because you look at that position and, you've talked about, well, Georgia sort of looks at him as an offensive weapon. Don't kind of get caught up in just, he's a tight end and they've added what they have at the position. But yeah, I'm going to be really interested there. And fact check, you did have Tico Crittenden in your first mock class. So he has been on the radar for Georgia, and he's a guy just looking at him. To me, it seems like he checks a lot of boxes and makes sense as a name to know on this visit weekend.
No doubt about it. And I think, when you look at Georgia, the way they've tried to recruit the defensive line over the last couple of years, at least, like I think they want to have a bunch of numbers, take a bunch of different body types that do different things. And I think they feel the best way to do that is building through the state of Georgia. And I think they feel like they've got a great pipeline of bodies in the state of Georgia. I think Tico Crittenden's one of those that's probably, been swept under the radar a little bit. But, it just sort of depends how many numbers Georgia wants to take on the defensive line. But you remember, it was not a big defensive line class in the 2025 cycle. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, it was Elijah Griffin and J.J. Hanna. And then I guess they ended up taking London Seymour late. But that might have been it. Was that it for defensive line in the 2025 class? So, yeah, I would expect a big numbers class. I maybe have been conservative on the defensive line numbers side when I've been building mock classes now that I talked through this. And so, both Zakai Helton and Tico Crittenden are two that really intrigue me this weekend as well. Next category, what I would consider the most competitive category. And what I mean by that is I don't necessarily think Georgia's in the driver's seat, but I think that Georgia is very, very much in all of these three recruitments that I'm going to mention here. And so that's defensive lineman James Johnson from Northwestern. That is Justice Fitzpatrick, the younger brother of Minka Fitzpatrick I believe he's at American Heritage. No, he's at St. Thomas Aquinas. I apologize. I know high school territorialism gets kind of crazy down in South Florida. So I'm going to get some people up in arms at me over that one. And then Chancellor Campbell, if you can fact check me on this one too, Jordan, where Chancellor Campbell goes to high school. This is a relatively new addition to Georgia's offensive line recruiting board, and I'll get into it in a minute, sort of why.
He is at Lakewood in St. Petersburg.
Lakewood in St. Petersburg. So 3 Florida prospects that right there should tell you why it's so competitive. It's never easy to steal guys out of the state of Florida, with Florida and Miami especially recruiting the way that they are right now. But also, Florida State has proven with Usmani Chroma last cycle, like you can't sleep on Florida State or they can get you. And so, James Johnson, defensive lineman, very high on Georgia's board. He's been in every single one of my mock classes. I think he's on your predicted commit team. We're maybe at a point where it's, I don't want to say the worst that I've felt, and I don't think that should not be indicative that I'm saying I feel Georgia is not in a good spot. I just think let's be realistic about it. He's one of the best defensive linemen in the country. He goes to Northwestern. He just transferred to Northwestern, so he transferred high schools in Florida. Miami's done pretty well recruiting that high school through the years. Miami is a program that is clearly a thorn in Georgia's side when it comes to recruiting, deservedly so, just with what, the progress that they've made year over year, and where I think that Miami feels like they have to get this year and next to get to where Mario Cristobal wants that program to be, winning recruitments like James Johnson, like Derek Cooper, like Jackson Cantwell against programs like Georgia is meaningful for them, proving the trajectory that they're on. So James Johnson, I don't want to say I don't feel good about where Georgia's at. I'm just saying be a little cautious. Like, yes, I've had him in all of my mock classes. Yes, I know that there's buzz out there that's positive in Georgia's favor. And I wouldn't even be shocked if he says all the right things coming out of the visit that makes people feel pretty good about where Georgia's at too. Just be a little cognizant of Miami. I just think that there's, they're one to be worried about in this recruitment. The same can probably be said for Justice Fitzpatrick. I've said it before and I'll say it again. His older brother, Minka Fitzpatrick, when he got recruited to Alabama, the 2 lead recruiters were Kirby Smart and Mario Cristobal. And I think because of that, the relationships are so deep with the Fitzpatrick family and where these programs are at and the way that they're recruiting right now. I think it's Georgia or Miami for Justice Fitzpatrick. There might be other schools that get official visits, but I'm really intrigued to see what we hear coming out of this one. This is a professional family that has handled this recruitment professionally. You don't hear Justice Fitzpatrick making a bunch of comments about his recruitment. You don't hear a lot of buzz about where this thing is trending and where it's not trending. And so, this will be that first big official visit. I think we're going to learn a lot about where this thing stands coming out of this one. And then with Chancellor Campbell, I'll be straightforward with you. I don't know a ton about this recruitment. Georgia only offered him in April. I think that was because they got out to see him and they said, holy moly, 6'8" offensive linemen don't grow on trees. And what better place to bring 6'8" offensive linemen than Athens, Georgia, where there's been proven success with them in the past. I think especially with Jackson Cantwell's recruitment not going in Georgia's favor, you've got to ask, where does Georgia turn? I know Malachi Lee from Hawaii is a name that's already official visited that we've talked about a bunch, but I think Chancellor Campbell is one that we've got to know. And I think that I don't know enough coming into this weekend, and I'll be interested to see what we hear coming out of this weekend, because this is a relatively new recruitment, but one, when you're a 6'8" offensive tackle, it's going to get competitive. Jordan, who would you put in the most important category, I guess, out of those?
Probably Chancellor Campbell, just because we're trying to figure out what exactly they're going to do on the offensive line. And the thing to me is, like you said, 6'8", again, it's one of those things where, Georgia might be having to play a little bit of catch up. Like you said, they haven't been recruiting that guy, nearly as long as some other schools have. And to, land on that radar and try to make an impression is really important. And yeah, I mean, I'm just really interested to see really how all of those recruitments play out of those guys you just named. And I got to be honest, a lot more Miami battles than I probably should have, more than I expected, and maybe I should have been more cognizant about the job Mario Cristobal and that staff is doing. I mean, they really are trying to build on what was, a team that nearly made the playoff. And, I think you see that in what they've done to this point in this 2026 cycle. And I'm not ready to say the U is back, but they are at least they're serving as a thorn in Georgia's side. And, it's making a lot of these recruitments really interesting.
I mean, I'll make a comment on that Miami thing because I don't think it's just a Miami thing. I think it's everyone loves to view everything as negatively as possible, right? So it's very easy to look at Miami and say, well, what have you done for 25 years and, whatever. And I think people have done that with Tennessee in the past. People have done that with Texas in the past, where it's so easy and natural for people in the online world that we live in to just be dismissive of everything and point out the negative. I think what people have to realize is recruitments are real life. Recruitments are not just, 200 characters on social media, make a offhand comment and go about your day. Like, recruitments are real people having real conversations with players about what you can sell and the hope of your program. And I think that when you are, Miami, you can sit here and say, we just had the best offense in the country last year. We just had the number 1 overall pick. We were just, one turn here or there against Syracuse away from, hosting a first round playoff game. And so because of all of those things, like, I think that the Justice Fitzpatricks and the James Johnsons and the Jackson Cantwells of the world, they don't live in this online echo chamber where everything's terrible all the time. Like, they see the vision in Miami. They see the positives that can come out of Miami. And again, I don't think it's a Miami conversation. Like, I think that people do this. People did this with Georgia for the first 4 years of Kirby Smart, really, like, especially the first 2 years, but even after they went to that first national championship and then, things tailed off in 18 and 19, people did this. Why would you go to Georgia? What Georgia hasn't won in 40 years. What can Georgia sell that Alabama or Ohio State or, Florida would have even argued that at a certain period of time because of how recent their national championship would have been compared to Georgia. And so just don't fall into the being the, low-hanging fruit guy on social media, because everything that goes into all of this is way more nuanced than that. The last 2 categories I'm going to break down, I'm not going to spend as much time on just because I don't love Georgia's chances with these players, and I also just don't think we can really say where anything's at with them with Georgia until after the weekend. One category is flip attempts. So there are 3 prospects that are going to be on campus that are committed to other schools. That is Auburn wide receiver commit Devin Carter, Alabama offensive line commit Chris Booker, and Ole Miss linebacker commit Isaiah Williams. We'll wait and see what we hear from each of these. Like, is there a world where I could see any or all of these 3 in Georgia's class? Sure. The chances of that happening isn't very likely. So let's see what we hear coming out of the weekend with all 3 of them. I would say Devin Carter is probably the most notable because we kind of knew Chris Booker was going to be officially visiting Georgia. It's not a huge surprise. Isaiah Williams is someone that's been in mock classes. He's on your predict a commit team via the flip a commit segment. Like, he is someone that fits Georgia's DNA at linebacker, so not a huge surprise. Devin Carter is someone that we've talked about. We've known Georgia was interested in and that he was interested in Georgia, but the fact that he's going to be taking an official visit is certainly notable, and probably of all the official visits that I've learned about for this weekend, probably the one that made my eyebrows go, oh, wow, I didn't realize that was going to be happening, and that's definitely interesting. And then the other one I'm just calling the unlikely out-of-staters. It's 3 guys that Georgia's bringing on official visits, but I don't expect them in Georgia's class. Could that change after a weekend like this? Yeah. That's why you bring them on official visits. That's why you have Sedarian Morgan, who I think Georgia views as maybe the best wide receiver in the 2026 recruiting class. That's why you bring him on campus. You got a Xavier Crowell, a running back that reclassified from 2027 to 2026. Georgia wasn't heavily involved when he was in 2027 because I think they've saw it as something down the line. The day he reclassified to 2026, Josh Crawford, got on the phone with him and made sure that he knew he had an offer and he was going to be heavily recruited in the 2026 recruiting class. I think Alabama's in a pretty good spot for both of them, but I also wouldn't necessarily count out Auburn either. You know how Alabama recruiting battles go. Auburn versus Alabama can get a little bit toxic at times. So we'll see where things go. But I like where Alabama, and I'll say this, I know people don't want to hear Alabama positivity on this podcast, but they're putting together quite a class. Alabama is not going anywhere in the Kalen DeBoer era. I'm just going to say that right now. They are in a great spot for some of the best players at their positions, and I'll just say that. And then Brandon Bennett, he is from American Heritage High School down in South Florida. Georgia's in such a good spot for other wide receivers, a lot of them that are similar to him in terms of being track speed type of guys. I'm not viewing him as someone that I think will be in Georgia's class at this time, but we'll see where that goes. Just in that flip attempts category or that unlikely out-of-staters category, Jordan, just any parting thoughts when it comes to the official visits?
Well, I think the biggest thing, which you pretty much laid out there, was you bring these guys on, and it's sort of my strategy when you're like trying to reach out to people, try to track people down, like when we're doing interviews and stuff, all they can do is tell you no. It's like, if there's guys you really like, you bring them on campus, you try to make an impression, and maybe, you make guys think twice. And again, I go back to the conversation we had a few minutes ago about offensive line, looking at Chris Booker and just, is that right? Chris Booker, the Alabama commit? Yeah. Yep. Seeing, if maybe you can get him to think about what he's going to do, because, you look at what they're trying to figure out. My understanding is he can play tackle or guard. To look at him and maybe try to get him to think twice. Although, I agree with you. I think that Alabama's done a really good job in building the 2026 class to this point. And, there's going to be some good battles between Georgia and Alabama in this cycle. And I think that's, I think Kalen DeBoer and his staff have picked up, as far as recruiting goes, right where they left off, when Nick Saban and all those guys were there. It seemed like every year there were some marquee battles in recruiting between Alabama and Georgia, and I think you're going to see that again this year.
Absolutely. We're going to jump to a quick ad break here in a second. When we come back, we'll talk arrow pointing up, predict a commit. Before we do that, I will say it's about to be a busy month for college football, specifically Georgia. There's official visits, commitments, summer camps, big picture college landscape news coming out of things like the spring meetings where Jordan's at right now, as well as many other, administrator, coaches, athletic director conversations that are having to go on in this new college football landscape. And that is ever changing. College World Series maybe as well. So, there is no better time or place to stay up to speed with everything than Dogs 24/7. So follow along with Jordan, Kip Adams, Olivia Sayer, and I would strongly recommend a Dogs 24/7 subscription right now. So go to dogs247.com and check that out. We will hop into an ad, and then when we come back, got a couple of segments to talk about some things. All right, Jordan, arrow pointing up. You want to start or you want me to start?
You start this one, Ben.
All right, I'll start. As you're seeing, for anybody watching on YouTube, I maybe should have sent a little warning shot to you or Kip to just drop it on you all like this, but I am going with the summer stash. I was doing it more for Memorial Day Lake purposes, just for some fun. And now my wife has said that I have to keep it for the summer. And so I just wanted to alert. I know I probably should have mentioned this at the top of the show because we're now 45 minutes in and people are saying, well, why the hell is this guy rocking a stash? But I've got the LASIK coming here at the middle of the month. So I'm going to be glasses off. I'm going to be rocking the stash. I just might look a little bit different for folks. So I want them to know we're still here. We're still talking college football. It's the same old us. We just look a little bit different. I will also say on that note, arrow pointing up just to the listeners. I've mentioned on the last episode, I'm a little nervous about this LASIK surgery, and to make it even worse, I just realized over the weekend that my surgery is happening on Friday the 13th, which I don't know how I didn't. Someone that is as nervous about this as I am, or as panic-ridden about any eye-related thing, should not have been doing this on Friday the 13th. But it's just a master class by the powers that be to pull this one over on me. But I did say last episode, if there's anybody that's gotten LASIK or that has experience with LASIK, like, reach out, offer words of encouragement. And we've gotten great feedback on this show up to this point, just talking recruiting. The Stay Wolk episodes have received good feedback. But knowing that someone had gotten to my little LASIK story and felt the need to reach out, I wanted to give a shout out to John Glenn on Twitter, X, JDG Stat. Said he got LASIK 30 years ago, said it was one of the best decisions he ever made, said his dad also got it, also said it was one of the best decisions that he ever made. So appreciate you listening, John, but also appreciate you reaching out with the words of encouragement. I mean, Jordan, how about that?
Yeah, that's got to make you feel a lot better. And you're a braver man than me than to stick with the Friday the 13th. I think as soon as I would have figured that out, I would have maybe made a call and said, "Oh, I'm going to be out of town. Can we change that?" Yeah,
I don't know. I was, before we got on and we're doing this show, I was watching, they send you like a 30-minute preview video of like, here's everything that you need to prepare for or whatever. And it was kind of just giving me the heebie-jeebies watching everything. So I don't know. I just got to make it to June 13th. Once I get into that operating room on June 13th, I can't bail out. So I just got to get there.
Yeah, I just hope it didn't look like a Final Destination thing. That was like all I could think of. I don't know if you saw that.
Don't do this.
But just no, I'm feeling good for you, and I think it'll go great.
For sure. And then we mentioned it at the start, or you mentioned it at the start of the show, and so I wanted to sort of get into this too. Arrow pointing up on the Big Ten SEC Challenge. You know more about the details of what's actually been talked about than I do. So, my dumb brain, I'm going through, what are all the opportunities? Like, could we have last year's rankings and this year's rankings, 1 through 16 and 1 through 16, and those teams face off against one another? Are we doing it first week of the year? Are we doing it a week 0 every year? Are we doing it last week of the year? Are we, because unfortunately in our last Junkyard Dawgcast episode, we talked about championship weekend not necessarily being the way that it is. Does that now maybe replace championship weekend in terms of how it's done? Like, what do you see? How do you see this playing out, or what are the perfect scenarios for you in terms of how this could play out?
So just to lay out what we know at this point on Wednesday, it's that there have been discussion behind the scenes about the SEC and the Big Ten doing it. Nothing finalized. A point that one of the writers down in Destin pointed out, we really don't know what the Big Ten side, thinks of this, because we heard from Brian Kelly. I think Shane Beamer also spoke about it, and I think Sam Pittman might have as well. My guess is they would do this in the start of the season, and that gives both conferences runway where, you don't want to be in a situation if you're the Big Ten where you play one of these games late and it, really significantly hurts a team's playoff chances. But I don't think any of that's been ironed out at this point. I wrote a story looking at some of the matchups I'd like to see for Georgia. Give me, Ben, who you would want to see Georgia play. I think if this happens, you're going to see this every year. So if there's 1 year where they play somebody, that doesn't mean, that's the only one of these. I think we're going to see this consistently. Ohio State was my pick, and I think it's 2030 and 2031. It's already on the books for Georgia. So they may just say, look, we're going to stick with this plan and leave them there. But the one that I'd like to see if this team can get better is Wisconsin. You consistently see Athens and Madison as those top college towns. And I'm going to go ahead and issue this challenge to any of the SEC athletic directors. If you guys make these games neutral sites, I will never forgive you. You have to make these home and homes. Let's have some fun with it. I know you can make a ton of money if you take this to like Mercedes-Benz or whatever. But I want to see a home and home, and I'd love to see Georgia and Wisconsin play.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking of places that would be fun to go to a game, like a whiteout in Happy Valley if it was against Penn State, that would be awesome. I think Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, like those go without saying. Just some of the Big Ten staples, for, selfish travel purposes, like USC or UCLA would be pretty sweet as well. To get to go cover a game out there would be fun. I'm sitting here thinking about it. Like if I'm trying to drop, we talked about this, like brainstorming, what's like the perfect way to do this. And there is no perfect way to do any of this. But I think as a viewer of college football, doing my best to try and maintain some semblance of college football, my ideal scenario as an SEC football person is 12-game conference schedule, 9 SEC games, which would be 3 every year opponents and 6 rotating opponents. So you would get and this is assuming that the SEC stays at 16, which is certainly not a given, and probably part of the complication that comes into the scheduling and the decision-making of all of this is if the SEC knows that it's going to add Clemson or North Carolina or Virginia or whoever it might be in the future, it just makes all of this a little bit more complicated. But 9 conference games, 3 common every year opponents, 6 rotating games. You have 1 ACC or Big 12 matchup that you would play every single year, and you can determine that as a school. Georgia would obviously be Georgia Tech, maintaining that historical rivalry, but other schools would maybe be able to take a different approach in terms of how they would go about doing it. The Big 10 SEC matchup, which we can live in whatever fantasy worlds we want about how it's Power 4 or whatever. It's a Big 10 SEC world. There's a reason why they get to call the shots. The reason why, if there's automatic qualifiers, they're going to have more of them. But I think coming up with some way, whether it is home and homes where it alternates, maybe it's a situation where every year, and this is me just spitballing. I'm sure there's going to be people listening to this and say that's a terrible idea for this reason. Why? Let me know why. I want to create this as a better idea, but maybe the SEC and the Big Ten play every single year, and based on the results of the ACC or Big Ten Challenge will determine who gets the home field advantage in the next year's ACC or Big Ten Challenge. Like maybe it doesn't have to be a Georgia-Wisconsin home and home. Maybe it's a, one league has the home field advantage, or, half the first time, half of it has the home field advantage and the other half doesn't. And then based on the results of that determines which conference gets it. But whatever that may be, that right there, that's 11 games, 9 SEC, 1 ACC or Big 12 game, 1 SEC versus Big 10 game. And then that gives you one more game, which I think should be some kind of G5 game. Now, the teams that the people that will be pissed about that fairly, and I think what you can't make everybody happy and certain things get lost, is that those FCS opponents, and they really survive off of this. And this is where I think spring games between teams versus FCS opponents would be a potential way that you could, satisfy that part of it. But to me, that's the perfect world. It's like you get 9 SEC, and I get it. Some people are going to sit here and say 11 games against Power 4 teams sounds crazy, but it's like, if that's just the way that it is in the world that everybody is playing in, like, it would be great for the viewer. It would be great for TV. Kirby Smart said it interestingly earlier this week, I think down in Destin, when he said, someone asked, I think, about like, are games like Clemson and Oregon not going to be scheduled as much? And he actually said the opposite. He was like, I think they're going to happen more because that's what fans want. And the big kicker, that's what TV wants. And so I think, drawing up a scenario where there's more good, compelling games against good teams. Yeah. Are you going to lose more games? Yeah. You are. Guess what? There's probably about to be a world where there's 4 automatic qualifiers from your league. So if you lose to Georgia Tech and you lose to Michigan in the Big Ten SEC matchup, well, you can still finish top 4 in the SEC and you're going to get automatic qualifying. So I don't know. I just went on a little bit of a tangent there, but I'm trying to solve college football scheduling, and I've decided that's, to me, as an SEC guy, the perfect way to diagram it.
I really like your plan, especially the FCS part of this, because as someone who loves all of college football, FBS, FCS going down, that to me is my biggest concern is there going to be FCS football in 5-10 years? And, how much money they could make on a spring game, I don't know. But to me, that is, you said it. I think when you look at future scheduling, it's the FCS teams that more often than not are going to be left out, from those paycheck games that we're used to seeing. And yeah, I kind of set up the home and home, but I don't hate the idea of, kind of trying to match, some of the top teams in the SEC and the Big Ten from the year before, and trying to make it kind of even where, like you would have maybe like, a Georgia, I'm trying to, like a Georgia and a Penn State, and then you work your way down and like trying to think who was like a Michigan State and a Kentucky play, like trying to kind of make it match just based on the year before. And, that's not always going to be one for one. You're going to get good games, but I think there's a lot of potential here. And, as this being something else that's changing in college football, I think this is one you can at least feel pretty good about, because I do think if they use this opportunity the right way, we could get some really good games out of it.
Also, just if we're, if there's any TV people watching, I like my ideas. I'm an ideas guy. Not all of them are great, but a few of them are. I'm sitting here thinking every year they could create something out of it where Big Ten, almost like the World Cup draw is the Big Ten SEC draw, and you find out who's playing who via some TV special or something like that. I probably shouldn't be people that hate the TV folks and think that the TV folks are the ones that have ruined college football, which there's a discussion to be had. They're not happy that I'm probably reasoning with terrorists, but hey, this is the world that we're living in. All right, Jordan, what you got for arrow pointing up?
All right, I got 3. First one, this kind of ties back to your mustache. I thought you were kind of doing like a Dale Earnhardt Sr. Tribute there. I don't know if you've seen, I think it's a 5-part documentary on Amazon Prime right now about Dale Earnhardt. I've only caught the first part, but arrow pointing up NASCAR, people are really excited about that. And Amazon Prime has begun broadcasting NASCAR Cup races. I think they have like a 5-race deal. They had their first one, the Coca-Cola 600, on Sunday night, and it was fantastic. The crew they've got, which includes Dale Earnhardt Jr. And some other familiar faces in the sport, did a really good job. And there was a lot of complaining, and a lot of older NASCAR fans were like, I don't even know how to stream this, and I don't want to sign up for this. And Amazon Prime was like, okay, here's a 30-day free trial that people can use. And I had to walk my dad through signing up over the phone, which was fun. But I talked to him afterwards. He really liked it, and I think NASCAR's got a little bit of momentum right now.
Yeah, what were your thoughts on the Coca-Cola 600?
It was good. I'll shout out Fletcher Page, former Georgia beat writer. He's got a fantasy league that me and some other writers play in, and I've had the worst luck I've ever had in this league. It's probably the 4th or 5th year, and I had Denny Hamlin, and Denny Hamlin's like making the charge late in this race, and then he stops for gas, and they do not fill up his car. So with like 10 laps to go, he runs out, and my year just goes from bad to worse. It was a really good race, and it's exciting. The Coke 600 is always a fun one. I went to it a few times as a kid, so I was glad I was able to tune in and check that one out. I
mean, that's worse for you than Denny Hamlin. Was that it? Was that all your arrow pointing ups, or you got more?
Oh, we got more.
Okay, let's do it.
Arrow pointing up preseason watch list on Wednesday. We got the first one, the Lott Trophy, which we'll shout out. Dalen Everett is included on that list, and this is about the time of year. There are certain milestones of the offseason. SEC spring meetings is one of them, but also when your inbox starts filling up with preseason watch lists, that's when you know the season's right around the corner. We still got a little ways to get there, but that was a good sign that, hey, it won't be much longer until they're back on the gridiron. Last one, arrow pointing up seafood. Haven't figured out where I'm going to eat down in Destin, but let's shout out a good friend of the podcast, Dan Peck, one of the co-hosts of the Auburn Observer. He spent a lot of time in this area, and he had sent me a list of some places to check out. So whenever we're done recording, whenever I get done with a little bit of work, we're going to check out, try to make sure we eat well on what I think will be the last day down here in Destin.
Yeah, definitely jealous of you for getting some good eats down there. And I am sorry that we're recording this so that you can't maybe enjoy some beach time or something like that too. But all right. Predict to commit. We're only doing one today. I'll do a quick refresher on both of our teams. You have 2 hits. I'll do it a little bit differently. You have 2 hits. Safety Jordan Smith, who's on his official visit this weekend, and then quarterback Jared Curtis, who's taking his official visit June 13th. You only have 1 miss on your team, and that happened on Friday when offensive lineman Jared Smith committed to Rutgers. I'm not going to say that I think that there's still a world there. No, you know what I am going to say? There is still a world where that one could hit. We saw last summer before June 1, Chase Linton commits to Rutgers, camps at Georgia on June 1. Georgia falls in love with him. He winds up at Georgia when it's all said and done. So we can't rule it out entirely. So for now, it's a miss, but it could still potentially hit. Running back Derek Cooper, linebacker Tyler Atkinson, defensive lineman Carter Lucky, tight end Mark Bowman, edge rusher, outside linebacker Kamari Brooks, defensive lineman PJ Dean, wide receiver Craig Dandridge, defensive lineman James Johnson, tight end Caden Prothrow, offensive lineman Desmond Green, and Ole Miss linebacker commit Isaiah Williams. Huge weekend for your team, Jordan. Now that I look at it, let's see here. Lucky, Dandridge, Brooks, Johnson, Prothrow, Green, and Williams. 7 official visitors this weekend are on your predicted commit team. How are you feeling going into the weekend?
I feel pretty good. I think that the fact that so many of those guys are visiting at this time of year, that seems to bode well. And I'm hoping some of those guys that Georgia feels a little bit better about, they get in the ear of some of those other guys. Maybe I need to send somebody a list and say, hey, you need to really work on this guy. We got to make this thing happen. I don't even know. We got to come up with some stakes on what, predicted commit, nets us. But no, I feel pretty good. Now, if for some reason, if things don't go well, maybe I am too busy to pop on next week's episode. But as of now, I'm feeling pretty good.
You're right. I think, when we launched this at the beginning of this year, it was more like, let's just test it out or whatever. And while I don't think you and I have any issue with playing for pride or bragging rights, which we both enjoy having over one another, you are right. The class of 2027 predicted commits are probably going to require some kind of very greater stakes, or maybe we even come up with something for this cycle mid. We'll see what happens. All right. For me, I've got 3 correct ones right now. Buford offensive line commit, Graham Houston, IMG Academy defensive back commit, Zach Fort, and then most recently Carrollton wide receiver commit, Ryan Mosley. I also have one incorrect, Jackson Cantwell on the offensive line. Other guys that I have, running back Jay Lamar, offensive lineman Malcolm Gaston, defensive back Tyreek Green, offensive lineman Ekene Boko, offensive lineman Brett Colajay, defensive lineman Ernest Rankins, defensive back Peyton Dyer, defensive back Justice Fitzpatrick, defensive lineman Whitley Caddo, and Alabama offensive line commit Chris Booker. Today, we are just doing predicted commit, not flip a commit, but, and this is going to be the plan for the entire summer, Jordan, when we are doing these predicted commits the week before official visits, you can only select players who will be on official visits this upcoming weekend. So we've already talked with everyone about the entire official visit lineup, many of whom are already on our predicted commit team. So the pool is maybe a little bit smaller than it typically is, but I will let you, because I'm, creating these, random rule sets, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, this is tough. I love this twist, and I think you've done a very good job, Ben. If you're listening to this, you kind of have to stay on your toes, whether it's, flip a commit or now we've got a very smaller pool to choose from. My pick for this episode is going to be defensive lineman Tico Crittenden. I think this is sort of a situation where, I look at not only my team, but also just how this class is coming together. And I think one of the bigger questions is what they do on that defensive line. I think that he, checks a lot of boxes, 6'4", 300 pounds. I think that you made a point earlier that I did want to kind of talk about. He's from Lithonia. You look at how they continue to recruit the state of Georgia well. And I think that, going back to when Kirby started as the head coach at Georgia, that was a huge priority. I think it's kind of been hit and miss depending on how good the state of Georgia's class was in a given year. But it seems like in the last couple classes especially, they've done a great job when it comes to staying in the state and getting the guys they want. I see Tico Crittenden being a guy that checks a lot of boxes, and he is going to be my pick on the predicted commit.
Love that pick. Obviously, it was on my list because the list was pretty small this week, but definitely was high up there on it. Really, for me, it came down to two, and I think that you were probably going to pick the other one. So for me, it was you were getting to decide for me who was going to be on my predict to commit team for this week. But I like that pick a lot. I will say, do you think it's Crichton or Crittenton? I don't know the answer. So what
your guess is as good as mine. Before you started talking, I made sure when we did the first segment of this episode to listen to it. I didn't even know the first name, so I made sure to make sure and pay attention to how you said it, because I know sometimes you do a great job, especially when we have interviews with guys, to have them say their names. But I get so in my head about trying to pronounce some names. So if I said that wrong, Tico, please don't take that out on me, because I am trying my best.
I don't know the answer to it either. So I'll try and get that answer for us for future reference. It's one of my pet peeves. I hear, not naming any names or pointing any fingers. Just it happens to everyone. Like sometimes I hear folks that are not, they don't have necessarily relationships with these players or whatever, and they're just name dropping them left and right, and they're getting their names wrong all the time. It's like I try for us over here at Dogs 24/7 to make sure we're getting it right as much as possible. And also I'll call out when we don't know, like this time. So,
and that's why you're a professional.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. All right. My pick, I'll admit, I did not think that there would end up being a scenario where this guy would ever end up on my predict to commit team. And I sort of laid out why earlier in this episode. But Carrollton, Georgia offensive lineman Zakai Helton is someone that I think has wanted to be at Georgia for a long time. And there's other schools involved in this, so I'm not saying that it's a shoo-in for Georgia to be able to get him. But I think that if Georgia says you are our center in this class and we want you, it's going to be hard for anybody to beat out Georgia in this one. Now, what I don't know, and where this is a little bit of a risky selection, is I don't know what that conversation is going to be like with him this weekend. I don't know right now what he's going to weigh in when he gets to Georgia. But I'll say, if Zakai Helton is comfortably 290 plus and Georgia pushes for him, I feel good about him ending up in Georgia's class. And that's really been the entire discussion. Like when you talk to people about the type of player that he is or the film that he puts out on a week-to-week basis, there are no questions asked about what type of player Zakai Helton is. It is really a matter of big people move big people in the SEC, and 250 and 290 are not the same thing. And so if, 290 holds up and that sticks, I like Georgia to push for him because I think that his film and the program that he's coming from and what he's asked to do as a center, calling things at his high school, Georgia's really going to like. And quite frankly, there's nobody else that Georgia, I have Malcolm Gaston on my team. You've had Desmond Green on your team. There's guys like Chris Booker that Georgia's recruiting. They have the ability to play center. But there's a difference between having the ability to play center and having been a center. And that's what Zakai Helton is. And so when PJ Dean made that switch to defense, of all the true center targets, Zakai Helton was really all that was left. I feel like it could be trending that way. It could not. But we'll see about that. What I will add is, for me, there were really three visitors this weekend that should have been in consideration for us for this. It was Tico Crittenden, it was Zakai Helton, and then it was Chancellor Campbell. I don't know enough about the Chancellor Campbell situation to feel comfortable picking him, but I at least wanted to call that out just because with the rule set that I'm putting in place where we're only going to be picking guys from the upcoming official visit weekend, unless we have a show and Chancellor Campbell hasn't committed and we're still doing the predict commit segment by, mid-July, the chances of him being on either of our teams is pretty slim at this point. And there is definitely a scenario where he's a Georgia commit and wasn't on either of our predict to commit teams.
Really like that pick. Like you said, I was between Zakai and Tico, and I think that you're right that you should feel good about the chances there just because we still don't know who that center is going to be in Georgia's 2026 class. I like that pick, and I'm probably reading too much into this, but I always think that it bodes well when you got a guy like that who goes to Carrollton and has a teammate that's committed. That doesn't necessarily guarantee anything, but I like that pick, and I think you should feel pretty good about that one.
All right. Our predict to commit teams, we're about to be finding out here in the next couple of weeks is when, the reality behind our teams is going to really show itself. But I think we're both in a good spot. We're going to have some hits. We're going to have some misses, but I think the percentages that we're looking at right now are pretty good, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if we win 100%, that wouldn't be any fun. Like,
Yeah.
oh wow,
We're ruining the whole thing. Why would anyone subscribe to Dogs 24/7 if they knew exactly what was going to happen here, right? All right, Jordan, another great show. I appreciate you for joining from Destin, Florida. You could have been kicked up on a beach with a Corona in your hand or something like that. Oh, actually, I shouldn't have done that because I don't know what ad deals we have with beer companies. Scratch that. I didn't say that, what I just said, but thanks to everyone who listened. Please subscribe to Dogs 24/7. One, it helps us. Two, I think that if you're a Georgia fan that's listening to this, there really is no better place to get comprehensive, thorough coverage on every single thing that you will be looking for in the Georgia landscape. So please subscribe over there. You do get a subscription to Paramount Plus as well when you get a subscription with Dogs 24/7. And I was just watching some Paramount Plus movies over the weekend as well. So I certainly enjoy that perk of it too. But like and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, which are our two most loyal audiences, we appreciate you. Please leave a review if you're so inclined. Give us 5 stars. We very much appreciate you. We will be back next week to review the official visit slate that we just talked about. We will preview next weekend's official visit slate during that episode as well. There will probably be some takeaways from Georgia's June 1st Elite Mega Camp. We just don't know what that's going to be yet because we don't know who's going to perform well at that camp. So we'll see what that looks like. And as for guests, these summer episodes are going to be long episodes. If we've got guests, I want to have them, but I also know we're going to have a lot to talk about. So it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. But we're going to have a lot of folks committing over the course of the next month, and that will be opportunity for some awesome interviews throughout the fall as well. Jordan, any last words before we call it an episode?
No, I think it was another fun one. I appreciate everyone who tuned in, and thanks for tuning in. Like Ben said, subscribe to Dogs 24/7, not only because you get great coverage, but you allow us to do cool stuff like go to Destin and hang out and see what all the coaches are saying, and then end the night with nice little seafood, maybe a beer.
Yeah, what's the seafood meal of choice for you?
I'll be honest, I'm not sure. I try not to be picky when it comes to seafood, and if I just see something, kind of let the menu speak to me, or ask whoever the waiter or whatever, what do you guys recommend? I like trying different stuff, and hopefully I'll report back next week, let you guys know whatever I checked out and what I thought.
Yeah, send a picture to the Junkyard too. I'm an under the radar foodie, Jordan. So I just I get food Instagram accounts, food photos that kind of get me going. So let's get that on the Junkyard later tonight. All right, for another Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show episode, I'm your host Benjamin Wolk. For Jordan Hill, we will